The time has come to talk about public and private, and in this video, while we're at it, I'm going to talk about getters and setters. So, what is a public and what is a private? They're basically a C# modifiers, that is the name of them. And what's the point? So let's say, for example, I want to access the role of the warrior inside of my tutorial. It's really simple. I can say mage.role and I can change the role. But if by any means I make it private, this will be only for the player class. If I go back to the tutorial, you're gonna see we're gonna have a problem. Player.lore is inaccessible due to its protection level. So once you create some function, so you can even add functions. So right now if I try to call player info, so mage.player.info, I cannot do it. It's not visible because it's not there. When you create something to be a private, it's only sticking to this class. And except if you inherit it, and we're going to talk about that later in the next video. But when you make something private, it's accessible only at that level, and only that class. Now then you have getters and setters. So if I make everything private, and let's say I want to change the role in the health, I could do that by, I'm going to say not by passing, so like going around the numbers and changing them within this script. So what you can do is you can create a public void set, for example, set health. This is same for the health, same for the float, same for the string, same for the integer, boolean, for whatever. You type in public, you add a void to make a function, you name it set in what you want to set. Inside of it, for the set, you have to have a parameter. So for example, for the health, we need float health. Open it up, and then you're gonna say this dot health equals to health and semicolon. That's all you gotta do. I'm gonna make my player info public so I can show you what do I mean by it. And this is a setter. A getter is public. Now it's not a void. This is the second function that we did, which will be our float get health. So we're getting our health. Open close parentheses, not semicolon, but curly brackets. And because this is a float, we have to return, and we're gonna return our health that we currently have inside of it. So as you can see, if I click on the health, it's referring to this. So to make things a bit more understandable, I'm going to say this dot health dot semicolon. So let's go back to the tutorial. We can see that our mage's health is 150. So if I say mage dot player info 150, if I say mage dot set health, I can change it to 10. And again, I'm going to call my player info, and let's see what are we going to get. And also we can see if I can go here and then not adding player info, I can even say print mage.get health, which will get the same health. And if I go back to Unity, click play, you're gonna see that the role of the player mage is 150, and then I changed it with this over here. So let me go. I changed it by adding the set health. And then you can see that in both of these, it's 10. So my health is 10. So this is how you can bypass that and have the better protection level for your game. But now the real question is if it's a really better protection. Before we move on to that, I'm going to show you a post where you can read that. It's really small. But before we do that, I also want to talk about you can add one more type or one more way to add getters and setters. That will be adding a public. Then based on what it is, because we want to change the role of the player, we're going to add a string, which we're going to call our role, but with capital R. And then we're going to open curly brackets. And here we're going to say get. And here we're getting our role, so return, because we have to return something. And we're going to return this dot role. Semicolon, and then we can have our set, then open curly brackets, and here we're going to say that this dot role equals to value and semicolon. So how we can access this is go to the tutorial called maybe mage dot role, as you can see capital R, and then say equals to rogue and then semicolon. This rogue is actually this value over here. So if I just add, so for example, if I say role mage.role equals to something, then I'm getting a setter. I'm using the setter. But if I say, for example, print our mage dot role. By default, this is a getter and I don't have to add anything else to it. So there are two ways to add it. So this will be for the health, this will be for the role. And by default, you can see that after I print it out, so over here, we're going to see a mage. And after I change it, it's going to be our rogue. As you can see, now it's mage, but after we change it, it's our rogue. And this is how you can use getters and setters. I use them sometimes in the course, not really. Sometimes because, as I said, I was having that dilemma. Is it really better to use getters and setters? Because if this is a public, I can change it by saying mage, for example, .role, but this is the same. I can just say mage.role and just change it because this is still a getter and a setter. So I ran into the post onto the Google, which one of the guys asked when to use private variables and when to use public variables. And he is like an intermediate programmer. He used Unity for a while and he actually asked this. And he gave a really nice explanation. If you want to check it out, quick pause and then read it. But also what I want to talk about is in Unity, I will probably talk about this one more time later. When you add a public integer, so right now we have nothing here. When you add a public, for example, float, speed, semicolon, when you add something that's public, you will see it inside of it here. And this was really good when you want to modify the speed, so you can click play. For example, you can click play and check what speed will be good for the player. It's really good for debugging. So based on that, I will choose if my float is going to be public or private. And then, as I said, you're going to see around, you're going to see while you're making games, what does need to be public and what does need to be private. Also, one more thing I want to mention, by default, when you create a value or a float, so here you can see void start. If I create a float speed, this is by default a private. If I create void move, like move, open close bracket, not animation move, but like move for the movement, this is by default a private. So as I said, if I remove it here, I cannot access the health. And right now, if I try to do it, so mage.health, I cannot do it. Of course, I can get getter and setter. And even then, if I change it and just leave it as a float, some plus s just to save it, you can see get health is not possible. So just something you know is when you create something and just add the type of it without adding anything, by default it is private. Also, there are other C# modifiers like protected, eternal private protected. You can read this, just type in C# modifiers and you're gonna see this. It's like a 4-minute read. One thing I want to mention, I've been programming, or I've been doing game development for 2 to 3 years. I never used it. Now, of course, I may be like a random guy on the internet, but when I say random guy, I don't have any successful game behind me. But as I said, I never used it. I've seen it sometimes, but really rarely when it comes to game development. So yeah, the most of the times you're going to use public and private, and that is everything you need. Like it's really based on the case when you will use protected, eternal, or protected, eternal, private, protected. As I said, you're going to see on your own when you start programming, when you start doing game development. I read a lot of code from my students for projects I downloaded. I really rarely saw, and I just saw protected. I never saw any of these. I just saw protected. So yeah, guys, that is everything I want to cover about getters and setters and what I want to cover about C# modifiers. Hope you like it, and I will see you in the next video.